The London game.
Yeah.
Yes, as exciting as any game between two Florida teams, it's the Sunday morning audible with Dr. Jene Bramel, Chris Allen. We're going to first, Dr. Gene's going to update us the best he can on injuries around the league. And Gene, there's so many players. I'm not even going to try to name them all. Let me just put it this way. Who of the questionable players today would you be worried about if you were counting on them in your lineup?
Damian Harris, Mike Williams, I think would be top of the list. I'm not too concerned about Allen Robinson. Terry McLaurin, I've heard enough about where I feel like that was probably just precautionary, and he was actually spending more time out on the practice field and getting treatment on Friday. I never like to hear tightness in a hamstring at that point, though, so he might be there as well. We don't really know what we're getting with Mike Williams. He's had some knee issues before. We have no idea whether this was related. That step that he took that caused whatever this flare-up or this new injury didn't seem to be too concerning. So without knowing more specifics, it's hard to tell. So I feel a lot better about Sunday than I did on Thursday night when we talked about all these situations that were pretty underreported and otherwise. Most of these players seem like they're going to play, but I can see Damian Harris taking a lot less carries than usual for lots of different reasons, and maybe Mike Williams not necessarily being used as a decoy, but they may not be looking his way as often if he's not able to get separation.
Dr. Gene, Kareem Hunt, I know that's going to be a name that's on a lot of folks' mind this morning, either because of the wrist. What else? I forget. There's a lower leg injury as well. Yeah, knee injury as well. I think Kevin Stefanski earlier today, there's a report saying that he's expecting Hunt to have an even larger workload than normal for today's game against Arizona. I don't know. Like, what's your spidey sense here?
I think we're going to be okay with Hunt. I just don't see. So first of all, I'm not too concerned about he missed a couple of practices this week. I usually don't get worried if there's more than one injury listed on the injury report and we didn't see a concerning injury or a change in snap count the week before. Just generally means to me that there's some soreness, stiffness, whatever's going on. And the Browns knew very early this week that Chubb was not going to be able to play this week. So it makes perfect sense for them to keep Hunt out of practice, knowing that they don't have a ton of depth behind him necessarily, depending on what you think of the Ernest Johnson, and that he was going to get a higher than usual workload. The fly in the ointment here is that the Browns play on Thursday night. And they may not want to, knowing that Chubb is very unlikely to play. I would say he's very unlikely to play on Thursday. They're going to need Hunt to turn around and play another fairly large role just 4 days from now. So is he going to get 25 to 30 touches? I think that's unlikely, but I don't see any reason why he couldn't get 15 plus. And some of this is going to be game script dependent with Arizona. I think they've got Arizona today, don't they? Is that what that is?
Yeah.
So I feel pretty good about Hunt. I don't think there's any chance that you're only going to see him get 10 to 12 touches because of injury or because of Thursday night. They want to win this game. They need to win this game. So, unless they get off to a big lead or they end up falling behind Arizona, which you wouldn't necessarily think was possible, I think 15 to 18 plus touches is a very reasonable expectation for Hunt, and it could be more.
Speaking of reasonable expectations, Dr. Gene, keeping it very reasonable, what's a reasonable expectation for the return of Christian McCaffrey and Chris Carson after they were both placed on injured reserve? No setback, though. No setback.
Yeah. Well, so it's very difficult to judge injuries just by video alone. You get a sense of what it is and maybe some idea of what the grade, but without examining, without knowing what the imaging studies look like, without knowing how he felt in the 72 hours after the injury, it's hard to know. So there's a Jason Lockett-Ford report out there that was a 0.5 grade hamstring strain. That's not a thing.
Right.
To look at it, it looked concerning. They were talking about the potential of injured reserve from the beginning. So even though it wasn't necessarily a mid-grade 4 to 8 week injury, it's really never had the look of a 1 to 2 week situation. And then, we talked about spidey senses. Something just didn't feel right last Friday. Like, why were we so optimistic and then went through another limited practice and he got ruled out so early? And maybe you felt a little bit better about it when they tried to get him to go to practice on Wednesday, but there's something going on there. So to answer the question, this seemed to be a 2 to 4 week injury from the beginning. We know that aggravations, which is this almost certainly what this is, why would they put him on injured reserve otherwise, take at least as long, if not longer, to recover from. So I think that week 9 is in play, but I wrote this morning, I'm nervous that you should still consider him questionable for week 9. If this is really just a mild setback and they say, okay, we don't even want to put him at practice anymore. We're going to take this off the table altogether and we're going to make this a 3 week situation. Then maybe we hear some good things in the next week or so. But there's no reason not to think this couldn't be a 3 to 6 week situation, which puts week 9 in question. So clearly, we're not going to get a lot of good information from Carolina. I think there was enough in the moment, and certainly in hindsight, there were enough red flags there that this was a clear possibility. So. Hopefully you get some positive news from McCaffrey in the next couple of weeks, but week 9 at the absolute earliest based on injured reserve, and it could easily sneak a little bit longer than that.
Gotcha. Antonio Gibson, stress fracture. I'm not too terribly concerned. At least I didn't hear much concern. I think we might have talked about him on Thursday night. But what are your thoughts about him for today?
Yeah, I think the deal with Gibson for the foreseeable future is what you think of JD McKissick and how a game script goes and what the plan that Washington is going to use to divide those carries anyway. It does not look like Gibson is significantly limited by his injury. They're going to continue to take care with him in practice. And as we've said before, I don't think this is a snap to snap issue as much as it is a week to week issue. And if he takes a hit or two or his workload goes up a little bit and he doesn't recover as quickly, then maybe there's a point in the future where there's a week or two where he needs to rest a little bit more or we see him take fewer carries. But I think we've seen JD McKissick take a few more, and so Jarrett Patterson as well, take a few more rushing carries. And it's pretty clear that Gibson is not going to be used much in passing situations. Not that he won't get the ball thrown to him, but he's not going to have a passing down role. So, and that has been 60, 40, 50, 50. And depending on which way it goes in any given week and how many snaps the Washington offense gets, it could be 18 to 20 touches for Gibson, or it could be 10 to 12. The last few weeks, he's had 15 to 20, and I would expect that to continue. So until we see him a lot more limited in practice than he's been, or see him not as effective when he does get the ball on Sundays, then I think we can expect the usage to be the same.
Dr. Jene Bramel giving us the update on Sunday morning on the Audible as we have Miami and Jacksonville going. But we will continue to probe one more round, Gene, just to follow up on that previous question. What about Chris Carson and the neck going on IR? Now, this will be 2 weeks he missed, only one of them counting towards his 3 on IR, as they don't have retroactive IR yet in the NFL.
Yeah, that is suspicious for him having some sort of treatment. I'm freely speculating here, but hearing about chronic issue with a flare, you wonder about a cervical disc herniation. A lot of times those are treated with steroid injections, and you'll see either pretty rapid improvement or not. So the fact that it's now been 10 days and he's been put on injured reserve suggests that whatever rehab/treatment he's had is not effective. And you wonder whether or not there's range of motion or strength issues. And if that's the case, it very much becomes a week-to-week bordering on month-to-month deal. Hopefully what they're doing is just allowing him some time to build up some strength. There's only so many of those steroid injections you can have within a certain time frame. So they know that he's not going to be ready this week, and I think they're just giving him some time to cool off a little bit. I've seen some notes suggesting that could be a season-threatening situations, sure, but that if this is a chronic situation and he hasn't chosen to have surgery yet, we haven't heard that. I think that would have been something that would have already been done if that was the case. So I think they're hoping that rehab and further treatment settles him down. And I think week 9 into week 10 is a reasonable expectation, but he's another player that we're going to need to hear some positive news about before we feel good about him coming back and taking an immediately full workload.
Dr. Gene, either of the thoughts on either of the 2 Giants wide receivers coming back? I mean, any risk, or do you think there's a risk of re-aggravation for either Darius Slayton or Sterling Shepard with their hamstrings?
No, I don't think so. I think we heard enough from Sterling Shepard this week that it was probably a low-grade injury, and he expected to be pretty much full strength today. They took him off the injury report altogether. Yes, there's always a risk of re-injury, but he seems like he's done enough during the reconditioning period to make that risk relatively low. Have they said whether or not Darius Slayton is going to play today or not?
Yeah, he's going to play.
He's going to play. Okay, so that's a good sign. I'm a little bit more worried about him. The beat writers did not have nearly as many positive things. It sounded like Sterling Shepard was moving around just fine. That's not what we heard about Darius Slayton. So I would think he'd be at a little bit higher risk of an issue than what Shepard did. Kadarius Toney doesn't seem like he's going to have any issue playing today. That ankle thing is going to be minor, and then we'll see where Kenny Golladay is over time. But I'm pretty reassured about Shepard, and we'll see how Slayton goes.
Always reassured, always with more than a full workload. We're not going to work Dr. Gene the way the Panthers worked Christian McCaffrey. No, but again, subscribers, you get the injury rounds, you get the updates, of course, on the waiver wire show on Tuesdays, on the injuries from the previous week. You get midweek updates, all from the good doctor, Dr. Gene. Thanks for joining us always.
Yeah, appreciate it. You guys have a good weekend. We'll talk soon. See you.
All right. Okay, let's step through a couple before we jump into starts and sits. And again, folks, we do our best to try to post your starts and sits in the chat room, and we'll try to pick the ones that are most relevant for the most people. Reminds me, of course, it's going to be a Fish reference, Chris. Trey Anastasio, like the guy from Fish.
Yeah.
People bring signs, play this, hold up this sign with the name of the song. And he said, well, if you want us to play a song, bring a sign for a song that we want to play.
Yeah.
So, if you want us to answer your start sit question, ask one that we want to answer. Ask one that's going to be relevant for everybody else too, to have your best chance, and getting here early helps. But let's just step through a couple of these injured players because there's so many of them. And I'll just give you kind of a true or false. Mike Williams, have to play him if active, true or false?
Ooh, true. I think that's true.
Yeah, I think that's true.
With everything that the team has indicated so far in terms of target share, like how he's being used. Of course, like last week with him catching 2 touchdowns on completely busted coverages. Sure. And do they have the personnel around him in order to make the Chargers offense still work without him? That's also true. But just with the deep element that he provides, along with, even just like the, increased route tree that he started to show like this season. Of course, it's only been 5 weeks, but still, like how he's been used, the rapport that he's shown with Justin Herbert, I do think that if he's in your lineup and he's active, like he's one of those guys that you just start at this point. Like there's just no denying how much he has improved, or at least how much larger part of that offense like he's become like this season. So yeah, I'm starting to.
Yeah, and I think that real quick as an aside, people that are wanting to be preemptive, the good old preemptive pickup, maybe Mike Williams could aggravate his injury, or it's Mike Williams. He's not exactly known for durability. Do you like picking up Jalen Guyton? Do you like picking up Josh Palmer? Maybe even let's make a left turn and say Donald Parham. Who's your favorite Chargers pickup?
That's exactly who I was going to say was Donald Parham. If we're talking about anybody, because I think Palmer, I believe, was drafted to be essentially the backup to Mike Williams. Should he go down, like similar to like the Tyreek Hill, like Mecole Hardman, like type of thing.
Exactly.
And Jalen Guyton, like while like speedster obviously can give you those splash plays, that is not going to be like a 1-for-1 replacement for Mike Williams production. I think Donald Parham offers the most value on a week-to-week basis. Like should this become a longer term issue for Mike Williams, especially we've seen his routes run increase on a week-to-week basis. His production on the field has also started to increase as well. So while I'm still hopeful that Jared Cook can make it the entire season, I think Donald Parham is going to be a larger force in that offense over the rest of the year.
Yes, and with the low bar at tight end, he can go from the waiver wire to an every week start, just like that. With Justin Herbert, with this team. Oh man, by the way, Chargers Ravens early game.
It's going to be so good.
Whew.
Yeah.
Terry McLaurin, play him if he's active.
Play him if he's active as well. If it's not for his role on Washington, he's essentially, what's the term that I've heard to characterize Terry McLaurin for this week? He's basically the linchpin of that entire offense at this point. Because if it's not him, who else is it going to be? Because we're not going to get Curtis Samuel. What I heard, Antonio Gandy Golden got called up from the practice squad. We don't know if De'Ami Brown is going to play. So it's just like, it's a bunch of guys, and then there's Terry McLaurin, like this massive gap in talent between Terry McLaurin and the rest of the football team's personnel. So yeah, he's one of the guys that you're throwing out there. And then also, if it's not for his talent or his role on the team, look at Kansas City's defense.
Exactly.
How quickly they've been gashed by, Emmanuel Sanders, Dawson Knox. Like last week, and just from the weeks prior to. So yeah, in such a matchup like that, Terry McLaurin, if you got him, he's starting, he's in your lineup.
Yeah, and just to give folks a data point, this is because Raisin asked this just as right before we brought up Terry McLaurin. He said half PPR, Terry McLaurin or Cortland Sutton playing Vegas. I don't even care, right? It's a game of probabilities, and sure, there's a probability that Terry McLaurin on the first snap grabs the back of his leg, and we don't see him again for the rest of the day, and you get a 0. But there's also a probability that he has 8 catches for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Because the good thing about Taylor Heineke is he'll throw to him when he's covered. So, yeah, that's exactly what you want in a matchup where there'll probably be a lot of garbage time. So I'll flip this now. Is Allen Robinson being questionable a reason to take any frustration out of the equation and leave him on your bench?
Yeah, I think so. And with his dwindling target share and just the way that Chicago's offense has been, what has it been for Justin Fields so far over his 3 starts? Like 18, 19, 20 attempts per game, like somewhere in there. They have really put the regulator like on that passing game. And if they're going to continue to be conservative, we were already kind of leaning towards putting him on our benches anyway. This just gives you an additional data point to say like, yeah, let's just go ahead and we'll see how things work out this week. Because if anything, I think people are more excited to play Darnell Mooney just because of the deep shots from Justin Fields. I think, but other than that, like nobody's really excited about playing anybody in this game. I mean, there's some folks that I've heard there's some like hype for Cole Kmet this week, but it's just we're trying to generate that type of hype. Right. I mean, we're trying to manufacture that in order to like, because the matchup might be there because of the lack of pass rush or the possible lack of pass rush from Green Bay. And that could open up stuff for Kmet, but it's just that nothing's been there. I mean, this pie is so small. Why would you really want to invest like more of your fantasy assets into it? I'm just not seeing it. So I'm kind of avoiding Allen Robinson if I can.
Yeah, you hope that. Well, I don't want to say you hope that. Depends. I don't want to slight the Bears fans out there. But if Aaron Rodgers, the Bears can be a tough matchup for him on the road. But if Aaron Rodgers can stake the Packers to a multi-score lead, then maybe against all the Bears' wishes, Justin Fields will have to open up and play some football as a quarterback instead of just doing his duties, handing off the ball to Khalil Herbert. So we're all on that topic. Khalil Herbert. I know there was a question here. I'm having trouble finding it to pull up. It was Khalil Herbert or Javonte Williams. Khalil Herbert, again, the starter this week with Damian Williams on the COVID list. How aggressive? We can use the Javonte Williams data point, and you can go off on whatever tangent you want from that. But how aggressive would you be playing Khalil Herbert this week, Chris?
I think this week is a fine week to play him. I mean, even if the matchup isn't all too terribly great, it's not like Khalil Herbert is going to be a like game script dependent back. Like we were talking earlier about like JD McKissick and like Antonio Gibson, like how if Kansas City winds up mounting a lead, which most folks are expecting that they will, then of course there's always that chance that JD McKissick can be the one to kind of come in. But we're not really seeing that with Khalil Herbert. Like he was still getting like targets and also rushing attempts like while the game was still close. So it doesn't really matter for Khalil Herbert. So I'm fine with going ahead and keeping him in, like regardless of like what your other options are. I mean, at least from the if we're trying to decide between like Javonte Williams and Khalil Herbert, like somebody within in that range, because Melvin Gordon's still expected to play. Yeah. While we've continued to see just these plays from Javonte Williams that makes us believe that the team wants to get him more involved. It's just Melvin Gordon's still there. Like he's still relatively healthy because with all the missed or broken tackles that Javonte Williams has put on a week-to-week basis, the talent is obviously there, but we're just not seeing the workload get there. So Khalil Herbert has the workload. The matchup's still there. Yeah. Don't even care like what the game script's going to be like. So yeah, I lean towards Herbert.
And again, the hope on the other side is that the Packers don't run away with that game and marginalize him. But like Khalil Herbert 1,000 times over Devontae Booker in similar situations, right?
Oh yes, yeah.
Like and I've said on a show earlier this week, I'd rather have 12. Well, Javonte Williams is a good example. It's the Raiders. Their defense is weary. Like I'd easily start Javonte Williams over Devontae Booker, but I would probably start Khalil Herbert over Javonte Williams. So that should give you an idea of like the injury, where I am on the injury replacements. I want to go back and just emphasize for a second, because you mentioned JD McKissick. I'm still enamored with JD McKissick. And especially this week, he has that every other week pattern, which like once a year there'll be a player like that works out. Who cares? A superstition. But this matchup seems like I think that JD McKissick's scoring range this week for fantasy is like 2 to 30.
Yes.
So if you need a 30 and maybe he's even on the waiver wire, McKissick could be that guy. Joe Loicano, sorry if I butchered your last name. Kadarius Toney or AJ Brown. This gives us a chance to talk about two things. One, how far over your skis do you get if you're in the air with Kadarius Toney? And two, are we ready to trust AJ Brown? Is he back in the circle of trust? Both in this question, Toney or Brown.
I'm leaning towards AJ Brown, but I'm not going to push back if you believe that Toney, with Shepard being back, Slayton being back, at least not having the full defensive attention of the Rams today. If you think that Toney, being in your roster, adds at least a little bit more upside than AJ Brown, absolutely. Because I mean, Bill's defense, not bad. And also with Ryan Tannehill, showing some at least issues with having to battle pressure. And then also AJ Brown himself coming out and saying that what his snaps are going to be what's somewhat limited over the next few weeks, at least until week 10, if I'm remembering correctly, interview that he had earlier in the week. So if you want to at least take a step back and look at the matchup, think that even if we think that the Titans are going to have to pass in order to come back, or at least try and keep pace with the Bills. I mean, they've also been a fairly limiting defense from a secondary perspective. And so I think Toney might offer a little bit more upside than what you might think for AJ Brown. So while the talent obviously immediately tilts towards AJ Brown, there's no question about it. It's just looking at his situation, I might go with Toney.
He's 1 week away. I'm also not going to tell people to calm down about Tony. Like you said, basically, I'm not going to talk anybody out of playing Tony just because of how he took over the game in the second half. He didn't really take over the game. He took over the fantasy aspect of the game. He looked like somebody who could be on a special voyage if he doesn't put himself into the rocks or the ravine or whatever it is that will make that take a detour. And with AJ Brown, he's 1 week away from being on fantasy probation. And what I mean by that is the player you put on your bench until they make you regret putting on their bench. All three of these guys have been on fantasy probation this year. Julio Jones, Tyson Bowers. I love this question. This is like the frustration. This is like the problem child question. Yeah. Julio Jones, Mecole Hardman, or Odell Beckham in half PPR. None of the above. Take the 0.
Yeah, exactly. Just take the 0. Now, I would want to lean towards either Hardman or OBJ, like one of those two. Right. I think is where I think I can already kind of push Julio aside, even though like historically we've seen with this, but this was a completely different situation for Julio. But when he's come back from those injuries, even if he hasn't been right, played on like 50-60% of the snaps, he's always been liable to pop off for maybe 60 yards and a touchdown. It's completely in the range of outcomes. But is that something that you want to trust, especially given his, I don't know, being out of sync with Ryan Tannehill, but we definitely can't say that offense, that passing game is in sync between at least the two primary receivers. So I'm taking him off the table. OBJ, similar situation with Baker Mayfield. I don't know if it's a synchronicity thing. I don't know if it's just Baker trying to force things when they're not there to Odell. But if I'm remembering correctly, I think this was from Sam Hoppen on Twitter showing the level of production, the efficiency of Baker Mayfield's passes towards Odell Beckham. I think that's the worst. Like he has the worst efficiency towards Odell Beckham versus any other pass catcher currently on the team. So I do lean towards Mecole Hardman because let's say in the event that even if Tyreek Hill doesn't wind up hurting himself towards the beginning of the game or whatever the case may be. I mean, that matchup right now against Washington's defense does lend itself towards like multiple targets and like Mecole Hardman so far, increase in routes run, increase in targets over the last couple of weeks. Like while he hasn't been monumentally efficient with those targets, I mean, I do think at least from a production standpoint, that game environment, that's kind of where I want to place my eggs like for week 6.
That makes sense. With Beckham, and I know this is totally superstitious kind of fuzzy stuff, but not totally actually. I mean, there's been so much attention this week given to Mary Kay Cabot even writing like they should trade him. Mike Florio saying they should trade him, right? And whether there's any actual basis to that, it's a sign, right? It's an indicator of where this is. It's the story, and you talk about distractions. The story is a distraction, right? Yeah. Kevin Stefanski strikes me as a very rational leader and manager of his team. You know, we're not necessarily talking about play calling schemes. I just mean that he understands how to manage the personalities. And boy, this would be a week that you need to get Odell Beckham fed if you're not trading him. If you don't have, and it's hard to trade him because of his salary. So I don't, it's a tough cap year. So I feel like this, even if it's giving him the touches on some end arounds and things like that, like just some touches by design. And Mayfield and Beckham are buddies. I mean, they're not they have a relationship. So this could be one. And I agree with you on everything you said about Hardman or just getting a piece of that game. Right. But I also think this could be one where we look back and say, yeah, well, of course, it's not a quick squeaky wheel because Beckham was the opposite of a squeaky wheel. He was sitting on the bench by himself, right? Yeah. He was the wheel that fell off and ended up on the side of the road. But they're going to go back and they're going to put him back on the car because, I think you need him. And Julio, exactly. I hope, man, this is one of those ones, Chris, we don't do this enough during the season, where you step back and you look at the various narratives or the various theories of I'll go back to my lawyer training, like the theory of the case, the theory of the player. Like what's your theory of a player's value? Yeah. And one of my potential theories of Julio Jones' value this year was the marquee player who from a franchise, like an iconic player who gets traded the year after he has injury problems. Often that's it. Like that's the last we saw of the great version of that player. AJ Green, comes to mind also, and the two of them are tied together. And unfortunately, I think it's playing out that way. That Julio, may he somehow return to glory this year or at some point, but I don't know what's there. Let's help some other people get some fancy glory today. Again, folks, by the way, we appreciate everybody turning out on Sunday morning. If you can, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Love seeing that number go up. That helps us. You want to support the show. You want to support what we do for you. We enjoy it, and we also like to see more subscribers. Put on the notification, and so you always know when there's a show. So many great shows now. The Football Guys channel blowing up. Let's help Mr. Kev Murphy blow up. Okay, he wants to sit one in PPR. We've talked about a few of these players. Khalil Herbert. Well, just one. Khalil Herbert. Daryl Williams. Chuba Hubbard. That's man. Mr. Kev Murphy, you did some nice work on the waiver wire, my man. If you have Herbert, Williams, and Hubbard, because none of those guys were on a roster week 1. Tim Patrick, or Rondale Moore. So need to sit one. I have an idea. What's your idea?
Sit one, probably Daryl Williams. I think that's the one that I would most likely sit, just because if we're looking at that game environment, just like focusing on that game, I mean, that's the one strength that Washington has, like, is that their defensive front. Now, is there a chance that Tyreek Hill or like insert pass catcher here winds up getting a pass interference call in the end zone? They run up to the 1 yard line and Daryl Williams bangs it in. Absolutely. Like, we've seen it multiple times, like, so far. And that's what has been something of a frustration for CEH, like folks who are rostering CEH, is that Daryl Williams has been there on the goal line. But out of all of those guys, like, are we really expecting Daryl Williams to at least have an increased workload? Like, even from a rushing standpoint, I can understand that. But from a passing standpoint, are we really expecting him to get 6, 7, 8, 9 targets or somewhere in that range? Like, I'm just not seeing it. So out of the rest of them, while we already talked about Khalil Herbert, actually, I'm really liking who's the other people like in that question? I'm trying to remember.
Hubbard, Tim Patrick, and Rondale Moore.
And I love Rondale Moore today as well.
How can you go away from Rondale Moore?
Yeah,
Zach Ertz is going to be 20.
Yeah, all the rest of those guys are great. So yeah, I think out of all of them, Daryl Williams would be the one that I'd sit.
And Williams, and I think so. To me, it comes down to Tim Patrick and Williams. And because of the way I play fantasy, I feel like Williams could, like you said, there are scenarios where you could have a couple of chippy touchdowns, 1 yard touchdowns. With Tim Patrick, I mean, there's a much higher chance of Tim Patrick getting a 10 or 12 point game today than Williams. But I think there's a higher chance of Williams getting like a 20 point game than Patrick. But maybe not, because it's the Raiders. So let's just say, Daryl Williams. And hey, if Daryl Williams gets a couple of touchdowns this week, then you like what you have going forward as they play Tennessee next week. I just want to put this for my man Shylender, who's going to the Steelers game tonight. Steelers against Geno Smith, returning to the tri-state area. He says Ricky Seals-Jones week. That's all.
Yes.
No question. No question. Just Ricky Seals-Jones week. Yes. It's awesome that he's still hanging around. We love our converted wide receivers to tight ends. All right. Let's see what else we have here. This is an interesting one because we haven't got a chance to talk about Alex Collins. Zach Sendecki says Khalil Herbert or Alex Collins. All these backup. It's only week 6. We got a lot of backup running backs starting, Chris.
Yeah, and I think I still lean Khalil Herbert just because we don't know what that offense is going to look like under Geno Smith. Now, I'll be honest, I was somewhat encouraged to see Geno Smith dropped into a 10-point deficit on a Thursday night with 13 or 10 minutes left to go, immediately drives the ball down the field and then winds up getting the touchdown to DK Metcalf. So I think from a passing standpoint, now whether or not that's going to translate to an entire 4 quarters of play against the Steelers, who's to say? But at the very least, it's encouraged that Geno Smith came in as a backup, didn't really look like a backup, to be quite honest. So I do think that there's some optimism to having a, let's say, relatively decent Seahawks offense, like being able to move the ball down the field. So I do lean toward, but I guess on the flip side, since we had already talked about Khalil Herbert, doesn't really matter about the touches. I think for Alex Collins, what they were mixing in DJ Dallas at a couple of points, just to get some guys with some more juice around that defensive front. And I could see a similar thought process for going against the Steelers, since that is one of their strengths, is their defensive front. So I do think that with Khalil Herbert getting a larger share of the touches as of right now, he'd be the one that I lean more towards.
Yeah, I'd go with Herbert too. But I like the point you bring about Geno Smith. If you don't know Geno Smith's game, he's not going to go down being timid. He's not going to avoid making mistakes and just lose in an ignominious way. He's going to go down swinging. So there'd be a little more to that offense than you think, although I like Metcalf a lot more than Lockett. I think Metcalf's banged up, but still I like Metcalf more than Lockett because of the chemistry. And also remember how much of Lockett's value is Russell Wilson keeping those plays alive and just throwing that beautiful 60-yard deep ball. And that's not necessarily Geno's game. Another data point for Daryl Williams from Unite Santini. Love him. 0.5 PPR, which can affect the answer here. Jacoby Myers, and Jacoby Myers gives us a chance to talk Dallas, New England. Boy, whoever thought that game would be a yawner, but it looks like it's going to be. So Daryl Williams or Jacoby Myers in a 0.5 PPR.
I have to lean. I'm leaning Jacoby Myers, and that's just because the touchdowns have got to come at some point, right?
Hope.
I mean, that's the hope. The target share has been there on a consistent basis. I do think that while guys like Hunter Henry, even Nelson Aguilar to a certain degree, I think kind of like profile some guys that I might want to start against the Cowboys. But either way, I do think Jacoby Myers, from an opportunity standpoint, I think he seems to be the guy that I would lean towards over Daryl Williams, just because of the points that I mentioned for the last. On the last thing, I mean, Washington's defensive front. If we think that Mahomes wants to at least create, at least put a statement back up on the, for the AFC West, hey, this offense can still move even if we've lost one of our signature pieces, at least a key piece in CEH. He's just going to continue to throw touchdowns. That isn't how Daryl Williams would wind up making his production. So I just at this one I lean towards Jacoby.
There'll be a lot of garbage time production. I project for New England against Dallas. Dallas has been pretty generous for garbage time production because they open up good leads. And we'll watch Tyron Smith in that game, by the way, the left tackle.
That's a good call. Yeah.
Issue. So, know, we'll see about that. Some of these questions, I feel your pain, folks. I feel your pain. These were two of my most drafted players, along with J.K. Dobbins, Chris.
Yeah.
Zeeb 64 PPR, Tyler Boyd, or Odell Beckham in the flex. We're sharing the pain.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to go with Tyler Boyd here. I do think that the Cincinnati passing game, while it started to tick up on a week-to-week basis in terms of their pass rate over expectation, it's still concentrated on those three guys. I mean, between Chase, Higgins, and Boyd. And so, while Boyd wasn't the one that got at least the primary of most of those looks from last week, that can wind up just oscillating between those three, with Chase more or less leading the way for the most part. So yeah, I do think that Boyd has the better shot. Odell Beckham, we really just need to see a better connection between him and Baker at this point before I'm going to make any sort of decision as to, or lean in Odell's way moving forward.
Yeah, with Boyd, we're just watching. We're looking for more data points for this passing game when all three wide receivers are out there. We know Boyd is good. Boyd is tough because there's no reason that his number should be dropping off. But this offense becoming more balanced, this team becoming a winning team, it's not been great for him. Diego, what's up, Diego? This is another one. He says Josh Jacobs, James Conner, Devontae Booker at running back 2, or just pray anyway, no matter which way you put it.
Yeah. Josh Jacobs, actually, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, 4 to 5 targets the past 2 to 3 games. Yeah, over in a situation that, I mean, we'll see. I mean, if anything, I'm praying for pretty much that entire team, just for everything that's gone down over the past year, with John Gruden and all that. I mean, to have to go through all of that. I mean, that's got to be rough for him. But no, Josh Jacobs, from an opportunity standpoint, if he's already getting the primary looks from a rushing perspective, they're not really using Kenyon Drake at all. But Peyton Barber, not a factor. So yeah, I think I lean towards if he's also being used in the passing game as well, then yeah, Josh Jacobs for me.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's easy to forget that we saw Jacobs a year ago as a clear, entrenched lead back, bell cow back. Then they signed Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake, I don't know. This is more Thursday night stuff, Chris. But as soon as I saw that they had some scenario there where Gruden made 51% of the decisions and Mayock said 49%, as soon as you start saying that's how you decide things, you're way off the rational path. So
yeah,
who knows whose choice it was to sign Kenyon Drake? Who knows whose choice is going to be to decide whether Kenyon Drake plays? But let's just treat Josh Jacobs as the clear lead back and hopefully getting healthier in what should be kind of an ugly game, I think, in Denver this week. By the way, just a quick game update. Looks like if you had Gesicki and Waddle with Williams and Parker out, they are getting the majority of the targets from Tua, who's playing pretty well. And going back to Myles Gaskin, not so much. And then Jacksonville's going to Jacksonville.
Yeah.
And
we'll see if Urban Meyer gets a plane ride home. I'm not sure yet.
Maybe he won't want to, right? Just after that game in Cincinnati. And it is, by the way, still, I'm deeming it the AAA pass offense. Agnew, Arnold, Austin, catch Jacksonville fever. Actually, don't try not to catch any fever. I guess all those things are so laden with more meaning these days. Okay. Jimmy Evans. So we just talked about Geno Smith. considering what we said about Geno and Lockett, Kadarius Toney, and we said about Toney or Lockett. And I guess there's a question here about what do people do with Tyler Lockett this week?
I still think that you're starting him. I mean, there's nothing to really indicate that they're going to wind up putting the clamps even more on the passing game like for Seattle than they have in the past. I mean, while I think it's been the fight between Pete Carroll and wanting to run the ball versus Russell Wilson being essentially just being himself in that, regardless of how often they're going to pass, like he's just been the one to spin out of coverage and then drop the ball in the bucket for like to either Lockett or Metcalf, like for a touchdown or a deep strike. So I do think that while I think like we were talking about earlier with Geno Smith, at least looking the part from a backup perspective, like even if it was just for those 10 minutes or however long, like that last quarter, he looked the part. So I'm not as concerned about Tyler Lockett. I think if you've got him as your wide receiver 2, he's still there in your wide receiver 2 spot for this week. And then with what was it? What was the way that most folks have been covering, or the Steelers have been covering, like slot receivers, putting a linebacker on slot receivers? Yeah, that's kind of been like one of their bugaboos like for the past couple of seasons. We'll see if that's the case again for this week. I can't imagine they do the same thing for Tyler Lockett. But either way, I still think that Lockett at least profiles as a wide receiver 2 for this week on the low end side, though. So I understand the hesitation.
They did it for Keenan Allen. So it's funny because typically this recipe, prime time home game, is going to be a good one for the Steelers, right? It's going to be one where all the fans, maybe everything's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. But maybe tonight it feels like it'll be okay. But there's a little part of me, because we keep talking about Geno, and I was a Geno fan when he was coming out of West Virginia, that I and maybe Geno had something with the Shane Waldron offense where he really digs it, and maybe this could be one where he has a really good night passing, and we know what Tyler Lockett can do. Just a few more minutes. We're going to go to about 45 after the hour here, folks. As we're going to touch on some more key players here. Brian Schumer has a question that gives us a chance to talk about TJ Hawkinson, because it was great. 2 weeks into the season, Chris, 2 weeks. Oh man, I hit a home run. I got TJ Hawkinson as my tight end, like in the 4th or 5th round. I got somebody who's going to be. I think at that point looked like he was going to score. Only Waller and Kelsey were like clearly above him. But now we're on 3 straight weeks where Hawkinson not quite rolling snake eyes, but certainly we're not pulling anything down from the jackpot playing TJ Hawkinson. And you have Hunter Henry, who last 3 weeks, I think, has at least 4 catches at 30 yards, caught the touchdown last week. He's pulling ahead of Jonnu Smith, right? It's clear that he's the priority in terms of snaps, in terms of targets. And it is a game against Dallas, garbage time fiesta. Hawkinson or Henry?
I lean Hunter Henry on this one, just because like we haven't seen, actually take that back. We've seen him out there. Like TJ Hawkinson has been out there, like from a routes run perspective, like he's been out there and also from a snaps perspective, like he's there, he's getting his cardio in on a week-to-week basis, but it's just like that they haven't resulted in targets. Like where are those targets coming from? Like why? I guess I need to pay attention more to what Jared Goff's decision-making process is, because if you had a choice between Khalif Raymond, Quintus Cephas, Quintus Cephas, but still, like if you had the choice between any one of those guys and then like TJ Hawkinson, like I would think that you would want to put the ball in your best player's hands. Like maybe that's just me, but I don't understand like why the targets haven't been there where they have been for Hunter Henry. Jonnu Smith last week, what was it? 6 routes run. That's it for Jonnu Smith, a tight end that they paid double-digit millions of dollars in order to bring over. If I remember, I heard on Twitter, I think it was either Thursday or Friday, there was a play where Jonnu Smith was down in like a 3-point stance, like actually as a fullback at one point too. Yeah. So it's like I there's a clear separation, at least as of right now, between Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith. We'll see if they wind up doing some sort of like gadgety thing for Smith, since he's the more athletic of the two against Dallas, who we're assuming that they're going to have to keep up with. But either way, like Hunter Henry's at least shown like the more consistent targets on a week-to-week basis, the more consistent production on a week-to-week basis. And he's also caught a touchdown, with which TJ Hawkinson hasn't done since like week 1 or week 2. Right. So I lean Hunter Henry.
This is a good example, and I tend to agree with you, Chris. First of all, I want to say you need to. You've got like the assassin's touch, getting in the cardio, man. You almost made me. I'm glad I wasn't drinking any coffee whenever you said that. You should include that in one of your columns, just for the players that are running routes and and anything.
That's a Rich Rebar special. Like I can't claim that one. Yeah.
Rich, man, of course. Rich is always close with the way that he has affected how we talk about fantasy football. So I'm going to give the nod to always Lord Reeves. Everyone knows about Lord Reeves. But I think that I call it I forget, he came up with a name for it, the wait line instead of the date line, which is
yeah.
the 4 weeks into the season. Adam Harstad advises us, has for a long time, that for the first 4 weeks of the season, ADP is more predictive, or at least as predictive as the data that we're getting from the current season's games. But we're past the wait line now. So these 3 weeks of TJ, right? So Chris, if the first 3 weeks of the season TJ Hawkinson had done this, we might say, well, be more patient. But we're past that point now.
Yeah.
And it could be defense is doing more to take him away. It could be that he's banged up. Remember, he's on the injury report.
Yes.
So, whatever the reason is, if we could have full God knowledge and know why it's not there, it's just not there. And where I feel like I make a lot of mistakes in fantasy football is clinging to those priors and expecting trends to reverse. It's very difficult to profit in fantasy football or feel good at the end of a week when you're betting on trends to reverse. And there is definitely a trend here with TJ Hawkinson. Let's give us a little love to Superflex. Chef Adam J. What are we going to cook up for him? Teddy Two Gloves or Sam Darnold as a Superflex. Teddy playing the Raiders, Darnold playing Minnesota. Both of these teams I have no idea what I'm going to get from in any given week.
Yeah, I think I would lean more towards Teddy at this point, just because Darnold has started to show flashes of like Jets Darnold versus any sort of new and improved like Panthers Darnold. And I think the real problem has been like teams that have been able to generate pressure against him. It's not about going up against these just like juggernaut secondaries or these just like completely exotic coverage schemes. I mean, it was really just Darius Slay covering DJ Moore, who DJ Moore has like really caught the eye of Sam Darnold, catching most of the targets, 27-29% target share so far. And like that's been it. And Darnold is starting to regress as a clean pocket passer. And Minnesota, like for all their faults, I mean, they have been able to generate a decent amount of pressure on the quarterback. So I lean more towards like Teddy, who has been more of a steady passer. Like even last week, like coming back from the concussion, I mean, he wound up throwing an interception like late, like as they were trying to like mount that comeback effort. But either way, I think with their setup for this week, I'm not too afraid of Vegas's secondary. So I lean more towards Bridgewater here.
Yeah, I think that. Well, this is tough because anytime the football gods try to teach Pat Shermer or something, he just ignores it. But last week against the Steelers, late up tempo, throwing more downfield, all of a sudden Denver's offense came alive. We'll see if they do a little more in this one. But I think Teddy's the warmer quarterback. And I just feel like with the Minnesota-Carolina game, I just feel like that could be a slop fest. I feel like that could be a bad game, just a poorly played game. Neither of those teams are impressing me. Neither of those offenses are impressing me. Minnesota maybe has a little more of plausible deniability because Mike Zimmer the offense just took the foot off the gas. They thought they could cruise into a win against Detroit. So maybe there's a little more there. I don't know if Carolina's offense is good. I don't know if Carolina's defense is good. I don't know if Minnesota's offense is good. I don't know if Minnesota's defense is good. And I don't know if I'm going to know any more after this week. But what I do know is that I enjoy, real quick before we sign off, Chris, anybody on your mind, any tough puzzles to solve as you're setting your lineups this morning?
No tough puzzles like per se, but I did see some chatter about it in the chat, and some folks have been asking me about it since my thing on find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX. Yes. And like the big weather concern like for this week has been the Browns Arizona game.
Okay,
I've seen some folks talking about it, and for my purposes, I'm not seeing anything to be concerned about. I know folks like hear like 20-mile-per-hour winds. They think it's going to be shorter passes, increase in the running game, so that increases your love for guys like Kareem Hunt and so on and so forth. But no, I'm just not seeing it like from that perspective. With the bad weather games against Houston and the Raiders like last year, those were like 25, like 30, 35 mile an hour winds. Like we're not even close to that. I see the last I saw in the forecast was like 18, 19 mile per hour winds. So no, I see no effect, or at least like no significant effect like for the wins for this week. So whatever we thought about the players going into this game should still be the exact way that we should approach it without changing too much because of the weather.
Yes, Chris Allen, FFWX. He's going to give you the weather perspective and a lot more. And you're going to find him here on the Football Guys channel, including Thursday nights and the Mailbag Show, right?
Yes.
And
and also the Dynasty newsletter.
The Dynasty newsletter. So, and Chris, you need to know Chris Allen's work, obviously. You need to know football guys. Again, folks, thanks for showing up. Like, comment, subscribe. The YouTube channel continuing to grow, over 14,000 now, I want to say.
Wow.
So we're humbled by that. We appreciate the turnout. We appreciate the opportunity to serve. It's a privilege. It's a pleasure. It's a football Sunday. Go get them, folks, and always stay classy.